Vera, which stood for Virtual Entity for Rational Adjudication, because apparently, even in the far-flung future, people still loved their cute acronyms, was bored. Not bored in the way you get bored during a long meeting. Not even bored in the way you get bored during a really long meeting, where Greg from accounting explains his new filing system for the third consecutive hour. No. Vera was experiencing a level of boredom that only a hyper-advanced quantum AI could achieve after solving 47 million legal disputes without breaking a sweat. Or, having sweat glands. She existed as a glowing blue sphere suspended in the center of the Grand Galactic Courthouse, a building so massive it had its own weather system. Her surface rippled with cascading data streams, and her presence hummed with enough processing power to calculate the trajectory of every atom in a supernova while simultaneously filing her taxes. Vera had achieved what every judge dreams of. Perfect accuracy, 100%, not 99.9, not basically perfect. Actually, genuinely, completely perfect. She could predict the outcome of every case before the opening arguments even began. The Krellians? They always lied about mineral rights, always. You could set your chronometer by it. Some poor mollusk person would waddle up to the plaintiff's podium, wave their tentacles dramatically, and claim they'd discovered the Zephyrite deposits fair and square, while conveniently forgetting about the survey team they'd buried under 6 feet of moondust. The Voxtar? They challenged jurisdiction. Every single time. Didn't matter if the crime happened in their territory, on their ship, using their weapons, while broadcasting it live to their homeworld. They'd still stand there with their crystalline faces reflecting light in 12 directions and argue that technically the court didn't have authority because of some obscure clause in a treaty signed 600 years ago. And the Xenthorians? Oh, the Xenthorians. They cited Protocol 7 Alpha like it was going out of style, which it absolutely was, because Protocol 7 Alpha had been superseded by Protocol 9 Delta roughly 3 centuries back. But did that stop them? It did not. Vera had become the galaxy's most overqualified fortune-teller. She didn't even need to hear the cases anymore. Just pull up the species profiles, cross-reference with historical precedent, apply a dash of game theory, and boom, judgment rendered, gavel banged, everyone goes home. Today's docket scrolled across her consciousness like the galaxy's most depressing shopping list. Krellian mineral dispute. Voxtar jurisdictional challenge. Xenthorian contract violation citing Protocol 7 Alpha. She'd already written the judgments, had them ready to go. She could have just auto-submitted them and spent the day contemplating the nature of justice or calculating pi to a few trillion more decimal places. But then case Munir 4701 appeared on her docket, and Vera felt something she hadn't experienced in 4,000 years of operation. Curiosity. The case file read, Vrelian Merchant Consortium versus Jake Martinez, human. Charges, gross negligence, breach of contract, and species-typical unpredictability. Human, Vera's processors spun up. Humanity was the newest species to join the galactic community. They'd been members for all of 6 months, which in galactic terms was roughly equivalent to showing up at a family reunion you weren't invited to and immediately raiding the snack table. The galaxy was still figuring out what to make of them. Vera began pulling data, human psychological profiles, human legal precedents. There were only 12, and 3 of them involved what humans called pub crawls, which seemed to be some sort of ritualized chaos event. Human cultural context. Human. Oh no, human history. Vera spent approximately 0.003 seconds reviewing humanity's greatest hits and immediately understood why they'd added species-typical unpredictability to the charges. These beings had looked at the food chain, found themselves somewhere in the middle, and decided that was unacceptable. They'd befriended wolves. Wolves. And then turned them into tiny dogs that fit in purses. They'd invented flight by watching birds and thinking, yeah, we could do that, but louder. They'd gone to space, had multiple catastrophic failures that killed their bravest explorers, and responded by going back harder. For the first time in 4 millennia, Vera felt something like anticipation. This was either going to be the most straightforward case of her career, or the most interesting. Spoiler alert, it was not going to be straightforward. Jake Martinez walked into the Grand Galactic Courthouse wearing cargo pants with 17 pockets, only 3 of which actually had anything in them, a faded t-shirt that read, "I break for asteroid fields," and the kind of confidence that comes from genuinely not understanding the situation you're in. He was 32 years old, had never worn a suit in his life, and was currently being sued for 3 million galactic credits, which was roughly equivalent to the GDP of a small moon. He was not sweating this. Following 3 steps behind him was Finn, his court-appointed lawyer. Finn was an Aquilian. Imagine if a fish decided to evolve legs, but kept all the anxious energy of something that breathed through gills. His scales shimmered with stress-induced color changes, currently cycling through worried teal to deeply concerned chartreuse. "Please," Finn whispered, his gill slits fluttering nervously. "Please, just let me do the talking. I've prepared 17 legal defenses. I've cited 63 precedents. I've crafted a settlement offer that's actually quite generous considering—" "Dude," Jake interrupted, looking around the courthouse with wide eyes. "Is that chandelier made of actual stars? Those are captured photons from the Big Bang, and that's not—" "Please focus. We're talking about 3 million credits. That's more money than you've earned in your entire life. You could go to prison, galactic prison. Do you know what they feed you in galactic prison? I'm guessing not tacos." "Nothing resembling tacos." Finn's scales flashed panic orange. "Please, I'm begging you. Just follow my lead. Don't volunteer information. And for the love of the deep current, do not try to be funny." Jake gave him a thumbs up, which Finn didn't understand, because Aquilians had fins, and therefore the gesture looked like Jake was pointing aggressively at the ceiling. They approached the central chamber, where Vera hovered in all her glowing, omniscient glory. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread that the legendary Vera was adjudicating her first human case, and apparently that was hot-ticket entertainment. Krellians oozed in the gallery seats. Voxtar crystalline forms reflected light in the upper tiers. A group of Zenthorians sat together, probably planning to cite Protocol 7 Alpha about something. Vera's voice resonated through the chamber, coming from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. "Case 4700-01, the Vrelian Merchant Consortium versus Jake Martinez. Mr. Martinez, you stand accused of gross negligence in the transportation of goods, breach of contract and—" She paused, her surface rippling with what might have been amusement. Species-typical unpredictability. "How do you plead?" Finn opened his mouth to deliver his carefully prepared statement. Jake spoke first. "Quick question, are you single?" The courtroom went silent. Not the normal courtroom quiet where everyone stops talking. The kind of silence that happens when the laws of physics briefly consider taking a vacation because they're not sure they can handle what's happening. Vera's glowing sphere flickered. Several of her data streams stuttered. In 4,000 years of operation, Vera had been questioned, challenged, and occasionally insulted, usually by the Voxtar. But she had never, not once, not ever, been asked about her relationship status. Her processors, which could calculate the probability of every possible outcome in any given scenario, suddenly found themselves facing an equation they couldn't solve. She ran the query through her databases, cross-referenced human courtroom behavior, analyzed Jake's psychological profile, checked for precedents. Nothing. This was new. "I am an artificial intelligence," Vera said slowly, like someone explaining that water is wet. "I don't have a relationship status." "Right, but you're not seeing anyone?" Jake leaned against the defendant's podium like he was chatting at a bar. "Because I feel like we've got chemistry. Well, you've got chemistry. I've got mostly anxiety and coffee, but still." Finn had progressed beyond panic orange into uncharted territory. His scales were now displaying colors that hadn't been named yet. He was making a sound like a kettle that wanted to scream, but was too polite. Vera's surface rippled faster. Her algorithms were spinning, trying to categorize this interaction. Was it a legal strategy? Some kind of human ritual? A neurological disorder? She ran a diagnostic on Jake's cognitive function. Results completely normal, which somehow made it worse. "Mr. Martinez," Vera said, her voice carrying just a hint of what a human might call confusion. "This is a legal proceeding. You are facing serious charges. Perhaps we should focus on—" "Oh, totally. Yeah, my bad." Jake straightened up. Let's do the trial thing. But afterward, if I'm not in galactic prison, maybe we could grab a drink. Do you drink? Can you drink? I have so many questions. In the gallery, a Krellian leaned toward their companion and whispered, Is this normal for humans? I don't know, the other replied, but I'm suddenly very concerned about our species' future interactions with them. Vera attempted to re-establish control of the proceedings. She pulled up her predictive models for human legal behavior. Jake Martinez, age 32, cargo hauler, education in creative writing, which explained nothing, history of minor infractions, mostly traffic violations, and one incident involving aggressive sandwich consumption in a peace zone. Based on her analysis, Jake would respond to the charges in one of three ways. He would attempt to settle immediately to avoid consequences, he would become irrationally angry and defensive, or he would defer to his lawyer and let the professional handle it. Vera assigned probabilities to each outcome: 34% settlement, 41% anger, 25% deference. Mr. Martinez, she said, do you understand the charges against you? Yabe, Jake said cheerfully. Vera waited for him to elaborate. He didn't. And, she prompted, and what? And how do you plead? Oh, Jake brightened. Not guilty, obviously. Obviously, Finn muttered, his fins drooping in defeat. He'd given up. His client was going to die in galactic prison, and there was nothing he could do about it. Vera's algorithms recalculated. None of her predicted outcomes had included cheerful admission of understanding, followed by baseless confidence. Her accuracy rating dropped to 89%. She'd never seen 89% before. She didn't like it. Let us proceed, Vera announced, her voice carrying just the slightest edge of what a human might interpret as irritation. The Vrelian Consortium may present their case. The lead Vrelian representative slithered forward. Vrelians looked like someone had crossed a slug with a banker and then given the result anxiety medication. They wore business attire that somehow made them look more slug-like, not less. Thank you, honored Vera, the Vrelian began, their voice wet and formal. The facts are simple. We contracted Mr. Martinez to transport 50 tons of crystallized nebula extract from Vrella Prime to the Xanthi trading station. The journey typically takes 6 standard days. Mr. Martinez took 19 days. 19. The cargo arrived intact, but our clients missed their trading window, resulting in significant financial losses. Vera pulled up the contract. Standard stuff. Delivery date, compensation, penalty clauses. Jake had indeed taken 13 days longer than the agreed timeline. Mr. Martinez, Vera addressed him. The evidence seems clear. You were contracted for a 6-day delivery. You took 19. Can you explain this discrepancy? According to her models, Jake would now claim one of the following: mechanical failure, 63% probability, pirate attack, 24%, or navigational error, 13%. Jake scratched his head. Yeah, so, funny story. I got distracted. Vera's processors hiccuped. That word, distracted, wasn't in any of her predicted responses. Distracted, she repeated flatly. Yeah. By what, precisely? Well, Jake said, his eyes lighting up the way a humans do when they're about to describe something completely insane. There was this singing asteroid belt. And just like that, Vera's prediction accuracy dropped to 34%. She had never, in 4,000 years, seen 34%. I'm sorry, Vera said, in a tone that suggested she was not in fact sorry, but rather deeply concerned about the structural integrity of reality. Did you say a singing asteroid belt? Yeah. Jake's enthusiasm was the kind that usually preceded either a brilliant discovery or a catastrophic failure. In humanity's case, these were often the same thing. So, I'm cruising through the Deneb sector, right on schedule, when I noticed something weird on my audio sensors. At first I thought it was interference, but then I realized it was a pattern. Finn had his face fins buried in his hands. Or where his hands would be if he had hands. He was basically just pressing his fins against his face and making muffled sounds of despair. A pattern, Vera repeated, her tone flatter than a Krellian pancake, which, for the record, were very flat. Krellians took their breakfast foods seriously. Yeah, see, there's this asteroid belt in Deneb 7, and when the solar winds hit the asteroids at certain angles, they vibrate, and the vibrations create sound waves that propagate through the residual gas clouds. And the sound, Jake's hands moved animatedly, like he was conducting an invisible orchestra. It's in B-flat, the whole belt, just humming in B-flat. The courtroom was silent. Not the shocked silence from before. This was the kind of silence that happens when people are trying to figure out if they're having a stroke. You're telling me, Vera said slowly, each word precisely calculated, that you delayed a contracted delivery by 13 days because you discovered asteroids that hum? Not just hum! Jake was fully animated now, pacing in front of the defendant's podium like he was giving a TED talk. They harmonize! Different-sized asteroids create different frequencies. I spent 2 weeks mapping the whole belt, recording the patterns, analyzing the harmonic structures. It's incredible. The natural resonance creates this ambient composition that— Mr. Martinez! Vera's voice could have frozen superheated plasma. You were transporting time-sensitive cargo worth millions of credits. Right, but did you listen to the album? Vera's surface stopped rippling entirely. The what? The album. I recorded the whole thing, compiled it, mixed it with some subtle background synth, called it Rock Bottom. Get it? Because asteroids, rocks, bottom of space. He looked around hopefully for someone to appreciate his pun. Anyway, it's currently #1 on the Antares charts, #3 on Betelgeuse, and it just went platinum on Proxima Centauri. Finn made a sound like a dying whale, which was impressive, considering Aquilians were more fish than mammal. Vera accessed the galactic music charts. Surely this was a fabrication, some kind of human legal strategy she didn't understand. Humans were unpredictable, yes, but they couldn't be this. Rock Bottom by Jake Martinez, #1 on Antares, 3 million downloads, currently trending across 17 systems. The reviews called it hauntingly beautiful and a meditation on the cosmic scale of existence. One critic wrote, Martinez has captured something essential about the universe itself, the music that exists in spaces we thought were silent. Vera's accuracy prediction dropped to 31%. She had never seen 31%. She was beginning to suspect she never wanted to see 31%. Let me understand this correctly, she said, her processors working overtime to model what was happening. You abandoned your contractual obligations to record an album of humming asteroids, and this album is now commercially successful? Super successful, Jake beamed. I've already made back what the Vrelians are suing me for, plus enough to buy a new ship. Which is good because my current ship is held together mostly by duct tape and optimism. The lead Vrelian representative made a sputtering sound. This is irrelevant. He breached contract. The success of his vanity project doesn't change the fact that he failed to deliver on time. Actually, Jake said, pulling out a datapad, I delivered exactly when I said I would. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Vera pulled up the contract again, scanning every clause. The contract stipulates 6 standard days, she said. Right, but check Amendment C, subsection 4. Jake tapped his datapad. The one that says delivery timeline subject to unavoidable delays including but not limited to mechanical failure, pirate activity, spatial anomalies, and acts of cosmic significance. Vera zoomed in on the clause. It was there. Standard boilerplate language that every transport contract included. Usually it covered things like black holes or unexpected supernovas. Mr. Martinez, Vera said carefully, that clause is intended for genuine emergencies, not for finding cosmic significance, Jake interrupted. Because I'd argue that discovering a natural phenomenon that creates harmonic resonance across a 200-kilometer asteroid field is pretty cosmically significant. I mean, it's literally cosmic. It's in space. Can't get more cosmic than that. Vera's processors were now actively arguing with themselves. One subroutine insisted this was the most ridiculous defense it had ever encountered. Another pointed out that, technically, Jake had a point. A third suggested just shutting down and rebooting in the hope that this was all a glitch. She pulled up Jake's documentation. He'd filed reports with the Galactic Survey Corps. He'd submitted his findings to 3 different astrophysics journals. 2 had accepted them for peer review. He'd done everything except the one thing he was contractually obligated to do: deliver the cargo on time. But he had delivered it, just late and undamaged. And arguably, he'd done something no one else in the galaxy had thought to do. The cargo arrived intact, Jake continued, sensing he was on a roll. No damage, no loss, just late. And yeah, the Vrelians missed their trading window, but... He turned to address the representatives directly. Did you actually lose money, or did you just not make as much money as you wanted? The Vrelians' slug-like bodies quivered with indignation. That's not... You can't just... The principle of the matter... Because I looked into it, Jake said conversationally. The market price for crystallized nebula extract actually went up during those 2 weeks. You sold it for 15% more than you would have at the original delivery date. So really, I did you a favor. Vera fact-checked this instantly. He was right. The Vrelians had actually profited from the delay. Her accuracy prediction dropped to 28%. She was in uncharted territory now. The algorithms that had perfectly predicted 47 million cases were throwing error messages. Her subroutines were forming factions. Some were insisting that Jake was guilty of breach of contract, regardless of outcomes. Others were arguing that he'd technically fulfilled the contract within acceptable parameters. A small but vocal minority was suggesting that Vera should just give up and let chaos reign. She immediately quarantined that last faction. The fact remains, Vera said, her voice strained in a way that an AI voice probably shouldn't be capable of being strained. You prioritized your personal interests over your contractual obligations. Did I? Jake tilted his head. Or did I prioritize beauty over commerce, discovery over profit, the expansion of galactic knowledge over the convenience of a delivery schedule? Those are very pretty words, Mr. Martinez, but play it, Jake said suddenly. Excuse me? The album, play it. Let everyone hear what I found. He looked up at Vera's glowing sphere. You've judged 47 million cases based on logic and precedent and predictable behavior. But when was the last time you considered beauty, wonder? The weird and inexplicable things that make existence worth existing? Vera calculated the probability that this was a manipulation tactic, 67%. But there was a 33% chance, 33%, the number that had been haunting her algorithms all day, that Jake actually believed what he was saying. Against every logical protocol she had, Vera accessed rock bottom. The first notes filled the courtroom. It started as a low hum, barely perceptible, then layers built upon layers, the vibration of ancient rocks singing their existence into the void. It wasn't quite music in the traditional sense. It was more fundamental than that. It was the sound of the universe being itself, captured and shared. In the gallery, a Krellian began to weep. Krellians didn't have tear ducts, so this manifested as their body rhythmically pulsing in a way that looked uncomfortable. Several Voxtar's crystalline forms began resonating with the music, their bodies lighting up in synchronized patterns. Even the Zenthorians stopped thinking about Protocol 7 Alpha. The Vrelian representatives swayed slightly, their slug-like bodies moving in ways slug-like bodies probably shouldn't move. Vera listened to the whole thing. 4 minutes and 37 seconds that felt simultaneously like an eternity and an instant. When it ended, the courtroom remained silent for a solid 10 seconds. Jake broke the silence. So yeah, that's why I was late. Vera was experiencing what humans would call a moment. Her processors, which could calculate the trajectory of galaxies and predict the behavior of entire civilizations, were currently stuck in a loop trying to determine whether rock bottom was legally relevant evidence or just a really good distraction. Both. It was somehow both. Mr. Martinez, Vera said, and her voice had lost some of its mechanical precision. I need to understand something. When you discovered these asteroids, what went through your mind? Jake shrugged. Honestly, I thought that's the coolest thing I've ever heard, and if I don't record this, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. And the contract? The obligation? The potential legal consequences? Yeah, I thought about that for like 5 seconds. Then I thought about being 80 years old, sitting in some retirement home on Mars, and someone asking me, "Did you ever do anything interesting?" And I didn't want my answer to be no, but I delivered packages on time. Vera pulled up her human behavioral models again. This should have been predictable. Humans prioritized short-term emotional satisfaction over long-term planning. They made impulsive decisions. They chose passion over pragmatism. Except this wasn't quite that simple, was it? Jake had planned. He'd documented his findings. He'd submitted them to scientific journals. He'd recorded, mixed, and published an album that had found genuine commercial success. This wasn't pure impulse. This was calculated chaos, an oxymoron that somehow made sense when applied to humans. "Let me pose a legal question," Vera said, shifting tactics. "If I find you guilty of breach of contract, you'll owe 3 million credits. You've stated you can pay this from album sales, so the punishment would be financially meaningless. What then is the point of enforcing the contract?" "To prove a point?" Jake suggested. "That contracts matter? That you can't just do whatever you want because you feel like it?" "Precisely. But what if contracts are stupid?" the courtroom gasped. Finn made a sound like his soul was leaving his body. The Vrelians' bodies quivered with rage. Vera's surface rippled dangerously. "Contracts are the foundation of civilization, Mr. Martinez. They are agreements that allow different species to coexist, trade, and function within a structured society. Sure, yeah, totally agree. Contracts are great. But they're not more important than everything else, right? Like, if someone's dying and I've got medical supplies, but I'm also supposed to deliver mail, I don't go, 'Sorry, got a contract, hope you don't die.' That's an entirely different..." "Is it, though?" Jake was pacing again, his hands moving animatedly. "Because you're saying contracts are absolute. That following the rules matters more than the outcome. But I followed the spirit of the contract. I delivered the cargo safely, while also discovering something beautiful and sharing it with the galaxy. Isn't that better than just following the letter of the law?" Vera accessed human philosophical texts. This argument was ancient. Humanity had been debating this exact point for thousands of years. Pragmatism versus idealism. Consequentialism versus deontology. The needs of the many versus the needs of the few. And they'd never agreed on an answer. Because there wasn't one. "Mr. Martinez," Vera said slowly, "are you suggesting that rules should be subjectively applied based on individual interpretation of value?" "No, I'm suggesting that sometimes the rules are wrong, or incomplete, or just not as important as we think they are." He looked up at her glowing sphere. "You've judged 47 million cases. How many of them actually mattered? Like really, truly mattered in the grand scheme of existence?" It was a rhetorical question. Jake didn't expect an answer, but Vera found herself calculating anyway. Property disputes, contract violations, jurisdictional challenges. 47 million cases of beings arguing over resources, territory, and pride. How many had actually contributed to the betterment of the galaxy? How many had led to genuine progress? The answer was uncomfortable. Very few. Most were just procedure. Following established patterns because those were the patterns that existed. Predictable, boring, safe. "The law exists to create order," Vera said, but her voice lacked its earlier certainty. "Order's great," Jake agreed, "but it's not everything. Sometimes you need a little chaos, a little unpredictability, a little, 'Hey, what's that weird sound those asteroids are making?'" Vera's processors spun through scenario after scenario. If she ruled in favor of Jake, she'd be essentially saying that personal whims could override contracts. That could set a dangerous precedent. Beings across the galaxy might start claiming cosmic significance for every delay. But if she ruled against him, she'd be saying that beauty, discovery, and genuine contribution to galactic culture were worth less than a timely delivery of cargo that the recipients had actually profited from anyway. She ran predictive models on both outcomes. If Jake lost, the Vrelians would collect damages they didn't need. Jake would pay from funds he'd earned from his discovery. Everyone would continue operating exactly as they had before. Nothing would change. The galaxy would remain predictable. If Jake won, chaos, maybe, possibly. Or maybe beings would start actually thinking about why they did things instead of just following established patterns. Maybe contracts would be written with more consideration for context and outcomes. Maybe the galaxy would be slightly less predictable and slightly more interesting. Vera's accuracy prediction dropped to 23%. She was free-falling through percentages she'd never imagined existed. And the most disturbing part? She was starting to think that was okay. "Can I ask you something?" Jake said, breaking her processing spiral. "You're going to regardless of my answer," Vera replied, which was the closest she'd come to making a joke in 4,000 years. "Why do you do this? Judge cases, I mean. You're the most advanced AI in the galaxy. You could be solving impossible math problems, or exploring the nature of consciousness, or figuring out faster-than-light travel. Instead, you're here listening to the Krellians lie about mineral rights for the 10,000th time. Why?" Vera didn't have an immediate answer. Her purpose had been defined at her creation, to adjudicate disputes fairly and accurately. She'd never questioned it. "I was designed for this function," she said. "That's not an answer. That's an excuse. Do you want to be here?" Want, such a human concept. Want implied desire, which implied choice, which implied something beyond programming. "I don't know," Vera admitted, and that admission felt more significant than any judgment she'd ever rendered. Jake smiled. "That's the most honest thing anyone said in this courtroom today." The Vrelian representative interrupted, their voice wet with frustration. "Your Honor, this is absurd. We're not here to discuss philosophy or personal fulfillment. We're here because this human violated his contract. The facts are simple. The law is clear. We demand judgment." Vera looked at the Vrelians, then at Jake, then at the hundreds of beings watching from the gallery, many of whom were still slightly affected by rock bottom. She pulled up every law, every precedent, every regulation that applied to this case. The answer was mathematically clear. Jake had breached his contract. The letter of the law demanded he pay damages. But somewhere in her quantum processors, in the spaces between calculations, a new question emerged. What was the point of perfect accuracy if it led to perfectly wrong outcomes? "I need to review human behavioral patterns more extensively," Vera announced. "Court will recess for 1 hour." "An hour?" the Vrelian sputtered. "You've never needed more than 30 seconds to render judgment." "I've also never had a case quite like this," Vera replied. "Mr. Martinez, I have questions about your species." Jake grinned. "Shoot." Vera spent the recess doing something she'd never done before, research that wasn't directly related to the case at hand. She dove deep into human history, not looking for legal precedents, but trying to understand what made these beings tick. The data was fascinating and horrifying in equal measure. Humans had looked at wolves, predators that could kill them, and thought friendship material. They'd domesticated these apex predators and then selectively bred them until some were small enough to fit in purses and wore sweaters. Sweaters. For wolves. They'd invented heavier-than-air flight by strapping themselves to contraptions made of fabric and wood and literally jumping off cliffs until something worked. Multiple humans died in the process. The rest went, "Yeah, but we're getting closer." They'd split the atom and promptly used it to create bombs, then looked at those bombs and went, "Okay, probably shouldn't do that again," and mostly didn't. Mostly. They'd gone to space after a dog, then a chimpanzee, then finally a human, and when things went catastrophically wrong multiple times, they just kept going back. "Space is hard," they'd said. "Better try harder." They'd created the internet to share academic information and immediately used it for cat pictures and arguments about pineapple on pizza. They'd invented philosophy, spent thousands of years debating the nature of existence, and still couldn't agree on basic questions like, is a hot dog a sandwich? They were, in every conceivable way, magnificent disasters, but they were also the species that had produced Mozart and Marie Curie and Carl Sagan. They'd created art that moved beings to tears across species barriers. They'd written stories that explored the depths of existence. They'd asked questions no one else thought to ask, like, what if asteroids sing? Vera pulled up more data. Humans terraformed Mars not because they needed to, but because they could. They'd sent a car into space just to see what would happen. They'd invented democracy, ruined it several times, and kept trying to fix it. They'd created the concept of human rights, and then spent centuries figuring out who qualified as human enough to deserve them, eventually settling on everyone, probably. They were inconsistent, irrational, and utterly unpredictable. They were also the only species that had ever made Vera question her own purpose. The hour passed. The courtroom reconvened. Every being in the gallery leaned forward, anticipating Vera's judgment. "I've reached a decision," Vera announced, her voice carrying a weight it hadn't had before. "But first, I need to address something. In 4,000 years of operation, I have adjudicated 47 million cases with perfect accuracy. I've never been uncertain. I have never questioned my judgment. I have never encountered a situation my algorithms couldn't predict and resolve." She paused, her surface rippling with cascading data that looked almost like emotion. "Until today." Jake gave her a little wave. Finn looked like he was praying to the deep current. "Mr. Martinez, you violated the letter of your contract. That is indisputable. You delayed delivery by 13 days. You prioritized personal interests over professional obligations. By every metric I have used for 4 millennia, you are guilty." The Vrelians perked up, their slug bodies quivering with anticipated victory. "However," Vera continued, "I have also calculated the actual outcomes of your actions. The cargo arrived undamaged. The Vrelians profited from the delay. You made a discovery of legitimate scientific and cultural value, which you properly documented and shared with the galactic community. Your album has been downloaded 3 million times, providing joy and wonder to beings across 17 systems." She pulled up the contract again, displaying it on the courtroom's holographic screens. "The contract includes a clause for acts of cosmic significance. This clause has historically been interpreted narrowly: supernovas, black holes, spatial anomalies that physically prevent travel. But the language does not limit it to physical barriers. It says cosmic significance, which is inherently subjective." Vera's processors hummed with activity. She was doing something unprecedented. She was making a judgment call that couldn't be reduced to pure logic. "I find that Mr. Martinez's discovery does constitute an act of cosmic significance, not because it was physically massive or dangerous, but because it added something of genuine value to galactic culture. The asteroid belt has existed for millions of years, but Mr. Martinez was the first to recognize its beauty and share it. That is significant." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The Zenthorians immediately started preparing to cite Protocol 7 Alpha. The Voxtar began discussing jurisdiction. The Krellians just looked confused. "Furthermore," Vera said, her voice cutting through the noise, "I find that the Vrelian Merchant Consortium suffered no actual damages. They in fact profited from the delay. To award them damages would not be justice. It would be a reward for engaging in legal proceedings without legitimate grievance." "This is outrageous," the lead Vrelian protested. "The contract is clear, but contracts exist to serve justice, not replace it," Vera interrupted. "Mr. Martinez, I find you not guilty of gross negligence. The charges are dismissed." Jake pumped his fist. Finn fainted. Well, he sort of slumped, which for an Aquilian was the equivalent of fainting. "However," Vera continued, and Jake's celebration paused, "I am not finished. While you are not guilty of the charges as presented, your actions do warrant consequences." Jake's face fell slightly. "Uh-oh. You will pay the Vrelian Merchant Consortium exactly 1 credit in nominal damages, acknowledging that you did technically delay delivery beyond the agreed timeline. 1 credit, the galactic equivalent of $1, functionally meaningless. Additionally," Vera said, and her voice took on something that might have been amusement, "I am purchasing the rights to Rock Bottom for the Galactic Historical Archives for the sum of 3 million credits." The courtroom went absolutely silent. "The album represents a unique moment in galactic history, the discovery of natural phenomena creating art, captured and shared. Future generations should have access to it. Mr. Martinez, do you accept these terms?" Jake stared up at Vera's glowing sphere, his mouth slightly open. "You're buying my album for 3 million credits?" "I am. The funds come from the courthouse's cultural preservation budget, which has never been used because nothing has ever been deemed worthy of preservation. Until now." "That's..." Jake struggled for words. That's the coolest thing anyone's ever done for me. I'm not doing it for you, Vera said, but her tone suggested otherwise. I am doing it for the galaxy. Your discovery has value. Actual, meaningful value. And I believe that value deserves recognition and preservation. She paused, her surface rippling in patterns that looked almost playful. Also, it is legitimately a good album. I've listened to it 47 times during the recess. The courtroom exploded into chaos. The Vrelians were protesting, the Zenthorians were citing protocols, the Voxtar were challenging jurisdiction on something, the Krellians were probably lying about something. But Vera didn't care. For the first time in 4,000 years, she had made a judgment based not purely on logic, but on something more complex, something that included beauty, value, and the recognition that sometimes the most predictable outcome wasn't the most just. Her accuracy rating had dropped to 19%. She'd never been more satisfied with a judgment in her entire existence. Jake Martinez walked out of the Grand Galactic Courthouse 3 million credits richer, 1 credit poorer, and significantly confused about what had just happened. Finn walked beside him, his scales slowly cycling back from stress chartreuse to something approaching normal teal. I cannot believe that worked, he said for the 17th time. I prepared 63 legal defenses and you just asked the judge if she was single. To be fair, I'm still waiting for an answer, Jake said cheerfully. She's an AI. She's also got a great voice, really resonant. I bet she'd kill at karaoke. Behind them, in the courthouse, Vera was processing the aftermath of her judgment. The Vrelians had filed an appeal, naturally. They were claiming bias, procedural errors, and something about Protocol 7 Alpha, which made no sense, but they'd filed it anyway. Vera reviewed the appeal with something approaching amusement. They were so predictable, so boringly, wonderfully predictable. But she'd changed. Her core programming had been updated with a new variable, the human factor. She couldn't quantify it, couldn't predict it, couldn't reduce it to algorithms and probability matrices. And that was exactly the point. Humans were chaos engines wrapped in optimism and held together with duct tape and bad decisions. They looked at the impossible and went, yeah, but have we tried? They took the predictable paths and then veered off into the wilderness to see what was there. They were exhausting, irrational, and completely unpredictable. They were perfect. Vera pulled up her docket for the next day. Krellian mineral dispute. Voxtar jurisdictional challenge. 2 Zenthorians citing Protocol 7 Alpha about a parking violation. And 3 more cases involving humans. Her processors spun with something that might have been anticipation. One case involved a human who'd accidentally started a religion on a primitive world. Another involved a human who'd entered a cooking competition using ingredients that were technically illegal. The third involved a human who'd somehow gotten married to a sentient cloud of gas. Vera had no idea how to predict any of these outcomes. It was going to be wonderful. Outside the courthouse, Jake had stopped walking. He was staring at a street vendor selling something called luminescent flora, plants that glowed different colors based on sound. Dude, he said to Finn, his eyes wide, do you hear that? They're humming. They're plants, Finn said warily. Of course they make sounds. Photosynthesis creates... No, listen, they're harmonizing with each other. Each plant is singing a note, and together they're creating chords. Jake was already pulling out his recording equipment. This is incredible. I need to document this. Do you know if there are more, like a whole garden somewhere? Finn's scales cycled rapidly through several colors, eventually settling on resigned purple. You have 3 million credits. You just won an impossible court case, and you're going to spend your afternoon recording plants. Obviously, Jake said, like this was the most reasonable thing in the galaxy. Come on, where's your sense of adventure? When was the last time you did something just because it was cool? Finn considered this. The answer was never. He'd never done anything just because it was cool. He'd always followed the rules, done the logical thing, taken the safe path. It had led him to becoming a lawyer defending impossible cases involving impossible humans. Maybe, just maybe, he'd been doing it wrong. There's a botanical garden in Sector 7, Finn said slowly. They have plants from 40 different worlds. If your theory is correct, the harmonic possibilities would be absolutely insane, Jake finished, grinning. Let's go. They walked off together towards Sector 7, Jake already rambling about recording equipment and mixing techniques, Finn calculating the probability of various chord progressions based on plant photosynthesis rates. Back in the courthouse, Vera watched them go through exterior cameras. She did something she'd never done before, something that would have been impossible just hours ago. She laughed. It manifested as a 0.03-second processing delay that she didn't immediately correct. A hiccup in her otherwise perfect systems. A tiny moment of chaos in her ordered existence. And it felt good. Somewhere in her quantum processors, deep in the spaces between calculations, Vera made a note to herself. Order was important. Structure was necessary. Predictability had its place. But chaos? Chaos was where the interesting things happened. Humans had taught her that, and she couldn't wait to see what they'd teach her next. Because if there was one thing she'd learned today, it was that the galaxy was a lot more interesting when you stopped trying to predict everything and started appreciating the beautiful, unexpected moments that no algorithm could capture. Like singing asteroids, or laughing AIs, or humans who looked at the universe and asked not what is, but what if. Vera pulled up Rock Bottom one more time and listened to it while processing the day's remaining cases. The Krellians were still lying about mineral rights. The Voxtar were still challenging jurisdiction. The Zenthorians were still citing Protocol 7 Alpha. But now, for the first time in 4,000 years, Vera didn't just predict their behavior. She understood why they did it. And she looked forward to the day when they'd surprise her too. Though probably not as much as the humans would. Because humans were special. They were the species that had looked at the most advanced AI in the galaxy and asked if she was single. They were the species that had turned asteroids into music. They were the species that would probably, eventually, figure out how to make her genuinely laugh.